The sun hung merciless over Highway 95, just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. It was late afternoon in the summer of 1958, and the asphalt shimmered with heat waves that made the distant mountains look like they were melting into the sky. The kind of heat that makes you understand why people died out here, why the desert doesn't forgive mistakes. Margaret Harris walked along the shoulder of the highway, her worn shoes kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She was 32 years old, but she looked older. Life had a way of aging you when you spent years walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, every breath against the mood of a dangerous man. Behind her, struggling to keep up, were her 2 children. Tommy was 7, a slight boy with dark hair and his mother's cautious eyes. Lucy was 5, still carrying the rag doll she grabbed when they fled in the middle of the night 3 days ago. The doll's dress was as faded as Lucy's own, both bleached by too many washings and too much sun. Margaret carried nothing but a small canvas bag. Inside, 2 changes of clothes for children, a nearly empty bottle of water, $17.34 in crumpled bills and coins, and a bus ticket to San Francisco that she bought with money she'd been hiding for 2 years. Money Richard didn't know about. Money that represented the only freedom she'd ever known. The car had died 6 miles back. An old Ford that Margaret had bought cash from a mechanic in Henderson, using the last of her hidden savings. The mechanic had assured her it was reliable, good for at least another 50,000 miles. It hadn't made it 200. What Margaret didn't know, what she wouldn't discover until much later, was that the breakdown wasn't mechanical failure or bad luck. Richard Harris had found the car. Richard always found everything. He'd paid someone to sabotage it, to make sure it would die somewhere between Henderson and Vegas, somewhere isolated, somewhere Margaret would be stranded and vulnerable, somewhere she'd have no choice but to call him for help, because that's how Richard worked. He didn't just control through violence, though there had been plenty of that. He controlled through orchestration, through making sure that every path Margaret tried to take led back to him, every escape route closed, every hope crushed, until she believed what he'd been telling her for years, that she was nothing without him, that she'd never survive on her own, that the world outside his control was more dangerous than the world inside it. Tommy stumbled, his legs giving out. He'd been brave, hadn't complained even once, but he was just a little boy and they'd been walking for hours in heat that would have challenged a grown man. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't." Margaret stopped. She looked at her son, at the way his lips were cracked from dehydration, at the way his skin was flushed red from sun exposure. She looked at Lucy, who was crying silently, tears making clean tracks down her dusty face. This was the moment. This was the choice Richard had orchestrated. Walk back the 6 miles to the car and use the emergency radio he thoughtfully had installed. Call for help. Call him. Admit defeat. Return to the prison that wore the mask of a mansion. Or keep walking forward into an unknown that was killing her children. Some choices aren't really choices at all. Margaret knelt down and pulled both children close. "Just a little further," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I saw something up ahead. A building. Maybe someone can help us." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had seen something maybe 2 miles ahead. A small structure that might have been a building or might have been a mirage. In the desert, it was hard to tell. They walked. Tommy leaned heavily against his mother. Lucy stopped crying and went quiet, which was somehow worse. Margaret counted steps to keep herself from thinking about what would happen if the building wasn't real, if there was no help, if they had to spend the night out here with no water and no shelter. The building became real as they got closer. A diner. Old. Forgotten. The kind of place that had probably been busy when the highway was new and the mines were still operating. Now it sat alone, surrounded by nothing but desert and broken dreams, serving the occasional trucker and whoever else the road threw its way. The Last Chance Diner. The sign was sun-faded, barely readable. But to Margaret, it looked like salvation. The diner encounter. The diner's door opened with a rusty squeal that made everyone inside look up. Not that there were many people to look. A trucker at the counter, working through a plate of eggs and hash browns. An elderly couple in a booth near the window. their coffee cups nearly empty. A waitress who'd seen better days, wearing a stained uniform and an expression that suggested she'd stopped being surprised by anything years ago. And in the corner booth, a man sitting alone. Margaret noticed him immediately, not because she recognized him, though his face was famous enough that she should have, but because of the way he carried himself. Even sitting, even in this forgotten place, there was something about him. Confidence without arrogance. Presence without performance. He wore a dark shirt and slacks, nice but not flashy, and he ate his meal with the calm patience of someone who had nowhere to be and no one to impress. The waitress approached Margaret and her children, her eyes taking in their condition with a practiced assessment of someone who'd seen desperate people before. "We're about to close for the afternoon," the waitress said, not unkindly, just stating facts. "Please," Margaret said, "just some water for my children." The waitress hesitated, then nodded. She brought 3 glasses of water and set them down at the counter. Tommy and Lucy drank like they'd been lost in the desert for weeks instead of hours, which Margaret supposed they had been, just a different kind of desert. Margaret counted the coins in her pocket. Not enough for meals, barely enough for coffee. But coffee meant staying inside a little longer, meant being somewhere safe while she figured out what to do next. She ordered 1 cup, black, cheapest thing on the menu. The coffee came. Margaret wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms, even though the last thing she needed was something hot. But there was comfort in it, in holding something, in having something that was hers, even if it was just cheap diner coffee. That's when she noticed the man in the corner booth again. He'd finished most of his meal, a steak, rare with potatoes and vegetables. But there was still food on his plate. Good food, more than enough for 2 small children who hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours. The thought formed before Margaret could stop it, before pride could prevent it, before shame could silence it. She stood up. Her legs trembled, whether from exhaustion or humiliation she couldn't tell. She walked across the diner, aware of everyone's eyes on her, aware of what she must look like, aware of what she was about to do. She stopped at the corner booth. The man looked up. His eyes were dark, intelligent, kind. He didn't seem annoyed by the interruption. He seemed curious. "Excuse me, sir," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't mean to bother you, but—" She stopped, swallowed, forced herself to continue. "Would it be possible, when you're finished, could my children have your leftovers?" The diner went silent. The truckers stopped eating. The elderly couple stopped talking. Even the waitress paused mid-pour. Margaret felt her face burn with shame. This is what she'd become. This is what Richard had made her. A woman begging for table scraps for her children. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked at Margaret, really looked at her, not at her request, but at her, at the worn shoes that had walked too many miles, at the blistered hands that gripped her coffee cup like a lifeline, at the way she positioned herself between him and her children, protective even in her degradation, at the quiet desperation in her eyes. Then he looked past her at Tommy and Lucy, sitting at the counter, at their hollow cheeks and sun-damaged skin, at the way they'd stopped drinking water and were now staring at their mother with expressions of confused worry. The man set down his fork. He didn't speak to Margaret. Instead, he raised his hand and caught the waitress's attention. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the diner. Smooth, rich, the kind of voice that commanded attention without demanding it. "Could you come here, please?" The waitress approached, notepad ready. "These children," the man said, gesturing toward Tommy and Lucy. "They haven't eaten, have they?" "No, sir," the waitress said quietly. "Bring them 2 of your best meals. Whatever kids like. Burgers, maybe, or chicken. Whatever's good and filling. And bring them quickly, please. They're hungry." The waitress nodded and hurried to the kitchen. Margaret stood frozen. "Sir, I just asked for—" "I know what you asked for," the man said gently. "You asked if your children could have my leftovers. The answer is no." Margaret's heart sank. "The answer is no," the man continued, "because your children deserve their own meals. Fresh, hot, proper. not someone's scraps. He gestured to the booth across from him. Please, sit down. You look like you're about to fall over. Margaret sat, more from shock than obedience. I can't pay for this, she said. I don't have enough money. Did I ask you to pay? No, but... Then don't worry about it. The trucker at the counter had been watching this exchange with growing irritation. Now he spoke up, his voice loud and crude. Hey, Dean, he called out. You know what she is, right? She's a beggar. Probably got some sob story ready about how her husband left her or her house burned down. They always do. You give her a meal, she'll be back tomorrow with 10 more just like her. The man, Dean, the trucker had called him, turned slowly to face the speaker. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. The casual friendliness evaporated, replaced by something harder. What's your name? Dean asked. What's it matter? It matters. What's your name? Frank. Frank Kowalski. Well, Frank Kowalski, let me explain something to you. Dean's voice was still calm, still measured, but there was steel underneath now. That woman you just called a beggar? She walked through the desert with 2 small children in 100-degree heat because she had no other choice. You see those blisters on her hands? You see how her children haven't complained once, even though they're exhausted and starving? That's not begging. That's survival. And if you can't tell the difference, that says more about you than it does about her. Frank's face reddened. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. You're saying that kindness should come with conditions. That help should only go to people you deem worthy. That dignity is something you can judge from a lunch counter. Dean leaned forward slightly. Here's what I'm saying. Dignity isn't something money can buy, and it's not something you can take away. That woman has more dignity in her little finger than you've shown in this entire conversation. She swallowed her pride to make sure her children could eat. What have you done today that required that kind of courage? Frank opened his mouth, then closed it. He turned back to his eggs, suddenly fascinated by his plate. The waitress brought 2 plates loaded with burgers, fries, and vegetables. She set them in front of Tommy and Lucy, along with 2 glasses of milk. There you go, sweethearts, she said softly. You eat up. The children looked at their mother. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. They ate, and watching them eat was like watching flowers bloom after a drought. Color came back to their cheeks. Life came back to their eyes. Dean had returned to his own meal, giving Margaret space to compose herself. But after a few minutes, he spoke again. Where you headed? He asked. Not demanding, just asking. San Francisco. Margaret said, I have a ticket. We were driving to Vegas to catch the bus, but our car broke down. You have family in San Francisco? A cousin. We haven't spoken in years, but she said once that if I ever needed anything. Margaret trailed off. And the children's father? Margaret's hands tightened around her coffee cup. He's not part of our lives anymore. It was a lie, and Dean seemed to know it, but he didn't push. It's a long way to Vegas on foot, he said. And the bus station isn't in the friendliest part of town. Not a safe place for a woman alone with children. I don't have much choice. There's always a choice, Dean said quietly. The question is whether you know all your options. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he made a decision. There's a place, he said carefully, about 40 miles from here. It's called Silverhaven Ranch. It's run by an old friend of mine, Jack Malone. Jack's a good man, honest, trustworthy. He helps people who need a safe place to stay for a while. Women and children, mostly. People who are running from something and need time to figure out their next step. Margaret stiffened. I'm not running from anything. Dean looked at her steadily. Okay, he said simply. He didn't argue, didn't accuse, just accepted her statement at face value. Even though they both knew it wasn't true. The offer stands either way, he continued. You want to go to San Francisco. That's your choice. But if you want a safe place to rest for a few days, to let your children recover, to have some time to think without pressure, the option is there. Why would you help me? Margaret asked. You don't know me. You don't know anything about my situation. I know you're exhausted, Dean said. I know your children are suffering. I know you had the courage to walk into this diner and ask for help, which is harder than most people realize. And I know that sometimes people need a hand up, not a lecture about how they got down in the first place. He pulled out his wallet and removed a business card. He wrote something on the back, an address, and handed it to Margaret. Silver Haven Ranch, he said. Jack Malone. Tell him Dean sent you. He'll take care of you. I can't pay for... Nobody's asking you to pay for anything. Dean interrupted gently. This isn't charity. This is just help. Sometimes people help each other. That's all. Margaret looked at the card. Then she looked at her children, who were finishing their meals with the kind of contentment that broke her heart because it was so rare. She thought about the bus station in Vegas, about navigating an unfamiliar city with two exhausted children, about Richard, who was probably already searching for her, about what would happen if he found her before she made it to San Francisco. She thought about choices, and which ones were real, and which ones were just different versions of the same trap. Okay, she said finally. Okay, Silver Haven Ranch. Dean smiled. It was the first time he'd smiled since Margaret had approached his table, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, more approachable, made her understand why people recognize him, why he was famous, though she still couldn't quite place from where. Good, he said. Finish your coffee. I'll drive you. The conversation and choice. The drive to Silver Haven Ranch took an hour. Dean's car was a black Cadillac, comfortable and cool, with air conditioning that felt like a miracle after hours in the desert heat. Tommy and Lucy fell asleep in the back seat within minutes, their bodies finally allowing them to rest now that they were safe. Margaret sat in the passenger seat, watching the desert roll past. She hadn't been in a car with a man, any man, without feeling afraid in so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like. But Dean didn't feel dangerous. He drove with one hand on the wheel, occasionally pointing out landmarks, but mostly just letting the silence be comfortable. You still haven't told me your name, he said eventually. Margaret Harris. Nice to meet you, Margaret. I'm Dean Martin. That's when it clicked. Dean Martin, the singer, the actor, the man on the radio and in the movies. She'd seen him in a film once, years ago, before Richard had stopped letting her go anywhere alone. I know who you are, she said quietly. I should have recognized you. Doesn't matter. In a diner or on a stage, I'm just a person, same as you. They drove in silence for a while longer. Then Dean spoke again, his voice casual but his words carefully chosen. You said the car broke down. What kind of car? A Ford. Old, but the mechanic said it was reliable. Where did it break down exactly? About 6 miles back. On the shoulder. I left it there. Didn't know what else to do. Mind if I have someone take a look at it? I know a good mechanic in Vegas. Might be fixable. Margaret shrugged. I guess, but I can't afford repairs. Let's just see what's wrong with it first. Maybe it's something simple. It wasn't something simple. Dean already suspected that, though he didn't say it. You didn't spend years in Las Vegas, years around powerful people and dangerous people, without developing instincts about situations. And every instinct he had was telling him that Margaret Harris wasn't just running from a bad marriage. She was running from something worse. They turned off the main highway onto a dirt road that wound through rocky terrain. The landscape changed gradually from pure desert to something greener, irrigated by underground springs and careful water management. After 20 minutes, buildings appeared in the distance. Silver Haven Ranch wasn't fancy. A main house, several smaller outbuildings, a barn, some horses and a corral. It looked like a working ranch, which in many ways it was. But it was also something else. A sanctuary. A place that didn't advertise its real purpose because the women who came here needed to disappear, at least for a while. Jack Malone came out of the main house. As Dean pulled up, he was in his 50s, lean and weathered, with intelligent eyes and a handshake like iron. A former military man who'd found his calling in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Dean and Jack spoke quietly while Margaret got the children out of the car. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she saw Jack's expression grow serious as Dean explained the situation. Then Jack approached her, and his voice was kind. Margaret, welcome. Dean tells me you need a place to stay for a while. We've got plenty of room. Let me show you around. The tour was brief but thorough. The bunkhouse where Margaret and the children would stay, clean and comfortable with 3 beds and privacy. The main house, where meals were served community style. The common areas were the other women. There were 4 others currently staying at the ranch, gathered to talk or read or just exist without fear. We don't ask a lot of questions here, Jack explained. Most women who come to Silver Haven are running from something. That's their business. Our business is making sure they're safe while they figure out their next move. You stay as long as you need to. Days, weeks, months. Whatever it takes. I can work, Margaret said quickly. I can help with cooking or cleaning or... We'll talk about that later. Jack said, right now, your job is a rest. Your children need you healthy. Dean had stayed by the car, giving Margaret space to see the ranch and make her decision. Now he approached, and Margaret turned to him. Thank you, she said. I don't know how to repay. Don't, Dean interrupted. Don't worry about repaying anything. Just take care of yourself and your kids. He started to leave, then paused. Margaret, one more thing. That car of yours. My mechanic's going to take a look at it. And if something seems off about how it broke down, if it looks like it wasn't just mechanical failure, I need you to tell Jack. Need you to be honest about what you're running from. Because if someone sabotaged that car, they're not going to stop looking for you. And we can only protect you if we know what we're protecting you from. Margaret's face went pale. How did you? I didn't. It's just a hunch. But I've been around long enough to recognize when something doesn't add up. A mechanic telling you a car is reliable, then it dying within 200 miles? On an isolated highway? That's not bad luck. That's planning. He waited. Margaret struggled with herself, with a habit of secrecy, with a fear that had kept her silent for so long. Finally, she spoke. My husband, Richard Harris. He's powerful, connected. He won't let me go. He'll find me. He always finds me. Not here, Jack said firmly, stepping forward. I've been running this ranch for 6 years. We protected dozens of women from men who thought they owned them. Some of those men were dangerous. Some had money. Some had connections. None of them got through our doors. None of them got to the women we're protecting. You don't understand, Margaret said desperately. Richard isn't just some abusive husband. He has people. He has influence. I understand perfectly, Jack said. And I'm telling you that here his influence ends. Here, you're protected. Dean put a hand on Margaret's shoulder. Trust us, he said quietly. You walked through the desert to save your children. That took courage. Staying here, letting people help you, accepting that you don't have to do this alone, that takes courage too. Different kind, but just as real. Margaret looked at her children, who were exploring the ranch yard with careful wonder. She looked at the main house, warm and welcoming in the fading afternoon light. She looked at Dean and Jack, 2 men she barely knew, offering her something she hadn't had in years. Safety without conditions. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'll stay. Dean smiled. Good. I'll be back in a few days to check on you. In the meantime, you're in good hands. He left. Margaret watched the Cadillac disappear down the dirt road, carrying with it the strange kindness of a famous man who'd stopped to help a desperate woman in a forgotten diner. She didn't know it yet, but that kindness had just saved her life. Silver Haven and rising danger. The first few days at Silver Haven Ranch passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Margaret slept more than she had in years, her body finally releasing the exhaustion it had been carrying. Tommy and Lucy bloomed like plants given water after drought. They played with the ranch dogs, helped feed the horses, and slowly started acting like children again instead of miniature adults trained to be invisible. The other women at the ranch welcomed Margaret with quiet understanding. They didn't ask about her past. They shared their own stories only when they wanted to. There was Sarah, escaping from a husband who'd put her in the hospital 3 times. There was Diane, whose ex-boyfriend had threatened to kill her for leaving. There was Carmen, running from a family that believed honor meant controlling their daughter's every choice. There was Ruth, still healing from burns her husband had given her when she'd asked for a divorce. Different stories. Same theme. Men who believed ownership was love. But on the fourth day, the peace shattered. Jack came to find Margaret in the garden, where she was helping Ruth plant vegetables. His expression was grim. "We need to talk," he said. "My office. Now." Dean was already there when Margaret arrived, which surprised her. He'd said he'd be back in a few days, but this was sooner than expected. He looked serious, professional, nothing like the relaxed man from the diner. On Jack's desk were photographs. Black and white, grainy, but clear enough. Margaret's car, the old Ford, on a lift in a mechanic shop, and circled in red marker. The brake line cut cleanly. The fuel line disconnected. The radiator punctured. This wasn't a mechanical failure. Jack said, without preamble, this was sabotage. Professional work. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Margaret sank into a chair. Her worst fears confirmed. "There's more," Dean said quietly. He opened a folder and pulled out newspaper clippings, police reports, documents that must have taken considerable resources to acquire. "I had some friends do some research on Richard Harris." "Margaret, did you know he was married before you?" "Yes." "She died. Cancer, he told me." "There was no cancer," Dean said. "Her name was Catherine Harris. She disappeared in 1952. No body was ever found. No investigation was ever completed. The case went cold after Richard's lawyers made it clear that pursuing it would be career suicide for any local cop." Margaret's hands trembled. "He killed her." "We can't prove that," Jack said carefully. "But the pattern is there. Catherine tried to leave him. She told friends she was afraid. 2 weeks later, she vanished. And then he found you." Dean continued. "Married you quickly. Isolated you. Made sure you were completely dependent on him. The same pattern he used with Catherine. Only this time, you got away before he could finish the cycle." "He sabotaged the car," Margaret whispered. "He wanted me stranded. Wanted me desperate enough to call him." "That's our theory," Jack confirmed. "The breakdown was planned to happen on that specific stretch of highway. Remote, but not so remote that you die of exposure. Difficult, but not impossible. He wanted you to suffer just enough to break you." Margaret looked between the two men. "How did you get all this information?" Dean exchanged a glance with Jack. "Let's just say I know people who know people. And when those people hear that someone might be hurting women and getting away with it, they're willing to help." What he didn't say, that those people included some very powerful individuals in Las Vegas, in Los Angeles, in New York. That Dean Martin's connections ran deep through entertainment and business and other worlds. That when Dean Martin quietly asked for help with something that mattered, people listened. "What do we do?" Margaret asked. "We prepare," Jack said. "Richard knows where the car broke down. He probably has people looking for you. It's only a matter of time before someone connects you to the diner, to me picking you up to Silver Haven Ranch. We need to be ready." "I should leave," Margaret said immediately. "I should go to San Francisco, like I planned. I'm putting everyone here in danger." "No," Jack said firmly. "You run now. You'll be running forever. Richard will always find you, always have power over you. The only way to end this is to stand and fight." "Fight with what?" "He's rich, connected. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," Dean said intensely. "You're a woman who survived years of abuse and still had the courage to protect your children. You're someone who matters, Margaret, and you're not alone anymore." Over the next 2 weeks, Richard's campaign to get Margaret back escalated systematically. First came the phone calls to Jack's office. Polite inquiries about whether anyone matching Margaret's description had been seen in the area. Jack denied knowledge, but they knew Richard didn't believe him. Then came the private investigator, a slick man in an expensive suit who showed Margaret's picture around local businesses, offering money for information. The community closed ranks. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody knew anything. Then Richard changed tactics. Letters started arriving, addressed to Margaret, alternating between pleading and threatening, promising he'd changed, swearing he just wanted his family back. then switching to warnings about what would happen if she didn't come home, threats about taking the children, accusations that she was unstable, unfit, dangerous. Margaret stopped reading them after the third one. Jack kept them all, documenting everything. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night. Jack had installed a sophisticated security system around Silver Haven Ranch, motion sensors and cameras that he'd learned to use in military service. At 2 a.m., the alarms went off. Jack and two of his ranch hands, both former military like him, responded immediately. They found a man trying to cut through the fence on the ranch's eastern perimeter. He wasn't subtle about it, wasn't particularly skilled. He was just following orders. They detained him, called the sheriff, one of the few local law enforcement officers Jack trusted, and the man crumbled under questioning. His name was Eddie Morse. Richard Harris had paid him $5,000 to scare Mrs. Harris into coming home. Eddie was supposed to get onto property, maybe throw some rocks at her window, leave a threatening note, make her feel unsafe. Richard had given him a detailed layout of the ranch, descriptions of where Margaret was staying, specific instructions about what to do and say. The sheriff arrested Eddie for attempted trespassing and conspiracy to commit assault. More importantly, he got Eddie to repeat his story on tape, with a lawyer present, creating a legal record of Richard's involvement. The case was building piece by piece. The sabotage car, the previous wife's disappearance, the harassment campaign, the attempted intrusion, Eddie's confession. But they needed more. They needed Richard's past to fully surface, needed his veneer of respectability to crack completely. Building the case. Dean made calls. Quiet calls to lawyers, to investigators, to people who owed him favors or who respected him enough to help without questions. He wasn't a lawyer himself, had no formal training in law, but he understood people and he understood leverage. One of those calls reached a woman named Patricia Chun, an investigative journalist in Los Angeles who specialized in exposing powerful men who thought they were above the law. Dean explained the situation, gave her access to everything Jack had compiled, and asked if she'd be interested in the story. Patricia was very interested. She arrived at Silver Haven Ranch 3 days later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with 2 assistants and enough recording equipment to outfit a radio station. She interviewed Margaret for 6 hours, documenting everything. Then she started digging into Richard's past with the thoroughness of someone who'd built a career on unearthing buried secrets. What she found was damning. Catherine Harris wasn't Richard's only missing wife. There'd been another woman before her, a girlfriend who disappeared in 1948. No body, no investigation, just a young woman who told friends she was afraid of Richard, and then she was gone. There were also business partners who'd been forced out of deals with Richard through intimidation, employees who'd been fired and blacklisted for minor infractions, a pattern of controlling behavior that extended far beyond his marriages. Patricia tracked down witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak before. Catherine's sister, who'd suspected Richard but had been threatened into silence. The 1948 girlfriend's college roommate, who'd kept letters describing Richard's possessive behavior. Former employees who'd seen Richard's temper firsthand. Each piece of evidence, taken alone, might have been dismissed, but assembled together, they created an undeniable portrait of a dangerous man who'd been protected by money and connections for decades. While Patricia built her case, something unexpected happened. Margaret's family reached out. She'd been estranged from them for years. Richard had made sure of that, convincing her that her parents and siblings were toxic, that they didn't support her marriage, that cutting them off was necessary for her happiness. Margaret had believed him because she'd been young and in love, and he'd been very convincing. But her younger sister, Ellen, had never stopped looking for her. Ellen had hired her own investigator after Margaret disappeared, had traced her to the diner through the waitress who'd served them, had eventually found her way to Silver Haven Ranch. The reunion was tearful and difficult. Years of separation had created distance. But Ellen was persistent and genuine, and slowly Margaret began to remember that she'd had a life before Richard, that she had people who'd loved her. Ellen brought their parents to the ranch the following week. Margaret's father, a retired schoolteacher, wept when he saw her. Her mother held her like she'd never let go. They met their grandchildren for the first time. children they hadn't known existed, because Richard had kept Margaret so isolated. "We thought you were dead," her mother whispered. "When you cut us off, when you wouldn't answer our calls, Richard told us you didn't want to see us anymore. We believed him. We should have tried harder to reach you." "It's not your fault," Margaret said. "He was very good at manipulation." The family reconciliation gave Margaret something she desperately needed, a support system beyond the ranch. People who would stand with her, who had their own resources and connections, who couldn't be intimidated by Richard because they'd already lost her once and weren't going to let it happen again. Ellen, it turned out, was a lawyer, not a criminal lawyer, but she knew criminal lawyers. Within days, she'd assembled a legal team willing to take Richard on, willing to build a case that would finally hold him accountable. The evidence mounted. Patricia's investigation, Eddie Morse's confession, the sabotage car, the pattern of missing women, witnesses coming forward, Margaret's own testimony about years of abuse, documented now with medical records that Ellen had helped to retrieve from doctors Richard had controlled. The district attorney, a woman named Sarah Martinez, who'd built her career on prosecuting domestic violence cases, reviewed everything. She was cautious, knowing that powerful men like Richard Harris had ways of making cases disappear. But the evidence was too strong, too thorough, too well documented to ignore. In October 1958, Richard Harris was arrested at his home in Henderson. The charges: attempted murder relating to the car's sabotage, conspiracy to commit kidnapping relating to Eddie Morse's attempted intrusion, and suspicion of murder in connection with Catherine Harris's disappearance. The arrest made national news. Patricia's article had run the week before, laying out the full scope of Richard's pattern of abuse. Suddenly, the case wasn't just about one man's crimes. It became a conversation about how wealthy, connected men could terrorize women for decades without consequence. The trial took 8 months. Richard's lawyers were expensive and aggressive, but the evidence was overwhelming. The sabotage car was physical proof of attempted murder. Eddie's testimony was corroborated by bank records showing Richard's payments. Catherine's disappearance, combined with the earlier missing girlfriend, established a pattern that the jury couldn't ignore. In June 1959, Richard Harris was convicted on all charges. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. When the verdict was read, Margaret was sitting in the courtroom flanked by her family and by the women from Silver Haven Ranch. They'd all come to support her, to witness the moment when the man who terrorized her finally faced justice. Margaret didn't cheer, didn't cry. She simply sat very still, letting the reality sink in. It was over. Richard would never hurt her again, would never hurt anyone again. Outside the courthouse, Patricia Chin approached her for a final interview. "How do you feel?" Patricia asked. Margaret thought about it. "Free," she said finally. "For the first time in 10 years, I feel free." Freedom and legacy. Margaret moved to a small house in Pasadena, California, in the summer of 1959. Nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom bungalow with a yard where Tommy and Lucy could play. She got a job as a secretary at a local law firm, work that paid enough to support them modestly, but honestly. Ellen lived nearby and visited often. Margaret's parents became regular fixtures in the children's lives, making up for lost time. The family that Richard had broken began to heal. Tommy and Lucy thrived. Tommy discovered a love for music and started piano lessons. Lucy joined the Girl Scouts and made friends easily, her natural warmth no longer suppressed by the need to be invisible. They were still cautious sometimes, still had nightmares occasionally, but they were healing. Children are resilient when given a chance. Margaret stayed in touch with Jack Malone and Silver Haven Ranch. She visited when she could, bringing groceries or help with fundraising. She understood now that the ranch wasn't just a place. It was a promise that women didn't have to stay in situations that were killing them. That escape was possible. That help existed. The ranch grew. Patricia's article had brought attention and donations. More women came, stayed, healed, and left to build new lives. Jack expanded the facilities, hired more staff, created a network of safe houses across Nevada and California. What had started as one man's mission became a movement. Dean continued to support the ranch financially. though he never sought credit for it. He'd send anonymous checks, arrange benefit concerts where all proceeds went to Silver Haven, use his connections to help women who needed jobs or housing or legal assistance. He did it quietly, the way he did most of his charity work, because he believed that helping people wasn't something you did for recognition. He and Margaret stayed in touch over the years. Not frequently, just occasional letters and phone calls. He'd check in to see how she was doing. She'd update him on the children, on her life, on the small triumphs that meant everything to someone rebuilding from nothing. In 1965, Dean organized a charity event at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, a benefit concert for women's shelters across the Southwest. Margaret was invited as a special guest, along with several other women who'd stayed at Silver Haven Ranch and rebuilt their lives. It was Margaret's first time back in Vegas since that day in the diner, 7 years earlier. The city had changed, grown bigger and brighter, but some things stayed the same. The desert was still merciless. The heat was still oppressive. And the Last Chance Diner was still there, still serving truckers and whoever else the road delivered. Margaret visited it before the charity event. The same rusty door, the same faded counter, even the same waitress. Though she looked older now, the waitress recognized Margaret immediately. "Well, I'll be damned," she said. "You're that woman, the one with the kids, the one Dean Martin helped." "Yes," Margaret said. "I wanted to thank you for the water that day, for not turning us away." The waitress shrugged. "Wasn't going to turn away a woman with hungry children. Besides, you gave me the best story I'll ever have. The day Dean Martin bought burgers for angels in disguise. That's what I call it." They talked for a while. The waitress told her that the diner had become something of a landmark after Patricia's article mentioned it. People stopped by hoping to hear the story, hoping for their own moment of magic. That night at the charity event, Dean took the stage at the Sands Hotel. The room was packed with celebrities, philanthropists, people who'd paid substantial amounts for tickets, knowing the money would go to a good cause. Dean performed his usual set, songs that made you want to dance, jokes that made you laugh. But toward the end of the evening, he did something different. He called Margaret up onto stage. She climbed the steps on shaking legs and used attention, uncomfortable with the spotlight. But Dean put an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. "I want to tell you all a story," Dean said to the audience. 7 years ago, I was eating lunch at a roadside diner. A woman walked in with 2 children. She was desperate, exhausted, at the end of her rope. She did something that took more courage than anything I've ever done on stage. She asked for help. He paused, letting the audience absorb this. "Margaret Harris," he continued, gesturing to her, "walked through the desert to save her children from a dangerous man. When she got to that diner, she had $17 to her name and no idea if she'd survive. But she had something more valuable than money. She had courage. She had love for her children. And she had the strength to accept help when it was offered." The audience was silent, listening. "People ask me why I support organizations like Silver Haven Ranch," Dean said. "Why I care about women's shelters and abuse prevention. This is why. Because Margaret's story isn't unique. There are thousands of women out there right now, trapped in situations they can't escape, believing they have no options, thinking they're alone." He turned to look at Margaret directly. "But you're not alone. None of you are." And Margaret proved that. She escaped. She survived. She rebuilt her life. Her children are thriving. She has a home, a job, a family that loves her. She won. The applause was thunderous. Margaret stood on stage, tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the support, by the validation, by the simple acknowledgement that what she'd survived mattered. After the event, she and Dean sat in a hotel lounge, drinking coffee, talking about how life had changed since that day in the diner. "You saved my life," Margaret said. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't helped us, you saved your own life," Dean interrupted gently. "I just gave you a ride. Everything else, escaping Richard, building your case, creating a new life, that was all you. But you gave me a choice when I didn't think I had any choices left. You treated me like I mattered when the world had spent years telling me I didn't. That changed everything." Dean was quiet for a moment. "You know what I learned that day?" he said finally. "I learned that kindness doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't require grand gestures or enormous sacrifices. Sometimes it's just ordering burgers for hungry children. Sometimes it's just offering someone a different option than the ones they can see." It was more than burgers, Dean. Was it? I think the burgers mattered quite a bit to Tommy and Lucy that day. They both smiled. "The truth is," Dean continued, "I think about that day a lot. About how close you came to not walking into that diner. About how if your car had broken down 5 miles further down the road, or if I decided to eat somewhere else that day, or if you've been too proud to ask for help, the whole thing came down to chance. To being in the right place at the right moment. I don't believe in chance anymore," Margaret said. "I think some things are meant to happen. I think I was meant to walk into that diner. You were meant to be there. All of it was meant to happen exactly the way it did." Dean didn't argue. He wasn't sure he believed in fate or divine intervention or cosmic purpose, but he believed in kindness. He believed in helping people when you could. And he believed that Margaret Harris was one of the bravest people he'd ever met. Silver Haven Ranch continued to grow over the years. By 1970, there were 5 safe houses across 3 states, all operating under Jack's coordination, all protecting women and children from the riches of the world. The ranch itself became a training center, teaching other organizations how to run effective shelters, how to keep women safe, how to help them rebuild. Margaret became an advocate, speaking at fundraisers, sharing her story to help other women understand that escape was possible. She was careful to protect her children's privacy, never using their real names publicly, but she was open about her own experiences. She believed that silence protected abusers, and she refused to be silent anymore. In 1988, 30 years after that day in the diner, a documentary filmmaker approached Margaret about telling her story on camera. She was hesitant at first, worried about reopening old wounds. But Tommy and Lucy, now adults with their own families, encouraged her. "Your story needs to be told, Mom," Tommy said. "Not just what happened to you, but what you did about it, how you survived, how you helped create something that saved hundreds of women." The documentary aired in 1989. It was called The Last Chance, named after the diner where Margaret's new life had begun. It won several awards and was credited with increasing awareness about domestic violence and the resources available to survivors. Dean Martin watched it in his home in Los Angeles. He was older now, his performing days mostly behind him, but he recognized the story immediately, recognized the woman on screen, though she looked different now, stronger, more confident, healed. He sent her a letter after the documentary aired. It was brief, typical Dean, nothing flowery or sentimental. "Margaret," it read, "saw the documentary. You told the story well. Proud of what you've built, what you become. The world needs more people like you. Love, Dean." Margaret framed that letter and hung it in her office at the Southern California Women's Resource Center, where she worked as a director coordinating services for abuse survivors. Dean Martin died in 1995. Margaret attended his memorial service, sitting quietly in the back, listening to stories about his career, his music, his impact on entertainment. She thought about adding her own story, about standing up and telling everyone about the day he bought burgers for 2 hungry children and changed a family's life forever. But she didn't. Dean wouldn't have wanted the attention. He'd done what he did because it was right, not because he wanted credit. So Margaret sat silently, honoring him the way he'd honored her, with quiet respect and deep gratitude. Silver Haven Ranch still operates today. Jack Malone retired in 2000, but the organization he built continues under new leadership. The ranch has helped over 3,000 women and children since it opened in 1952. Many of them arrived with nothing, just like Margaret did. Many of them left with new lives, new hope, new understanding that they deserve safety and dignity. There's a plaque in the main house at Silver Haven Ranch. It reads, "Dedicated to everyone who asks for help and everyone who offers it. Sometimes kindness is as simple as a hot meal. Sometimes it changes everything." Underneath that plaque is a small photograph. Dean Martin and Margaret Harris, taken at the 1965 charity event, standing together on stage. Dean has his arm around her shoulders. Margaret is crying. Both of them are smiling. That photograph represents something important. It's not about celebrity or fame or grand gestures. It's about the moment when one person recognized another person's humanity and decided to help. About the choice to see suffering and respond with kindness instead of indifference. On a shelf below the photograph sits a coffee cup from the Last Chance Diner. Chipped, faded, nothing special. But to Margaret, it represents the most important cup of coffee she ever ordered. The one that bought her enough time and a safe place to meet the man who would give her a chance at freedom. Tommy Harris became a social worker, specializing in helping children from abusive homes. Lucy Harris became a teacher, working in underprivileged communities, believing that education was a path to independence and safety. Both of them credited their mother with showing them what courage looked like, what strength really meant. And Margaret, now in her 90s, still tells a story whenever someone asks. The story of a desperate day in the desert, of walking into a diner with nothing left but hope, of a man who ordered burgers instead of giving judgment, of how a simple act of kindness became a lifeline that pulled her out of darkness. People think survival is dramatic, she says. They think it's about fighting back or making grand escapes. But sometimes survival is just accepting help when it's offered. Sometimes it's trusting a stranger who orders hot meals for your children. Sometimes it's believing you deserve dignity when the world has told you otherwise. She pauses, remembering, Dean Martin gave me that, not with money or fame or connections, though those helped later. He gave it to me with burgers and kindness, and a simple message that I mattered, that my children mattered, that our suffering wasn't acceptable just because it was happening to us. That's what I want people to understand. Helping doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't require wealth or power or special skills. It just requires seeing someone's pain and choosing to respond with compassion instead of judgment. Dean saw us that day, really saw us. And because he did, because he chose kindness, everything changed. The desert highway outside Las Vegas still looks the same. Hot, merciless, unforgiving. The Last Chance Diner still serves coffee and burgers to truckers and travelers. The road still breaks down cars and tests people's limits. But somewhere in all that harshness, in all that difficulty, there's the possibility of grace. The chance that someone will be kind when kindness matters most. The hope that asking for help won't bring shame, but salvation. August 1958. A desperate woman, 2 hungry children, a forgotten diner, and a man who chose to see their humanity instead of their helplessness. That's not just a story about Dean Martin. That's a story about all of us, about the choices we make when we encounter suffering, about whether we look away or step forward, about whether we offer judgment or offer hope. Margaret Harris walked through the desert because she had no choice. But because Dean Martin chose kindness, she walked into a future she'd never imagined possible. A future of freedom, dignity, and the power to help others find their own way out of darkness. That's the real legacy of that day. Not what Dean Martin did, though that mattered, but what his kindness made possible. How one act rippled outward, touching hundreds of lives, creating hope where there had been only despair. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest gestures. Sometimes a hero is just someone who orders burgers for hungry children. Sometimes salvation comes in a diner on a highway to nowhere, offered by a stranger who simply decided that helping was more important than walking away. That's the story. That's the truth. That's what, excuse me, sir, can we have some leftovers, really meant, and what Dean Martin's answer, unexpected, generous, transformative, actually accomplished. Not just a meal, not just kindness, but a second chance at life itself.